Hello. I'm Meta Spencer, and today I get back in touch with a fellow I've known a little bit for a number of years, but not very well. So I get to know him a little better today. This is Jonathan Granoff, who is the president or the head honcho, anyway, at the Global Security Institute, which is someplace outside of you're in Ballackinwood, Pennsylvania. Is that where you are? Outside of.
Not for a long time.
No, not for a long time. The last time I knew you were. Where are you nowadays?
Our office is 2 blocks from the United Nations.
Oh, okay. Well, that puts you in the big league, doesn't it? Ballackinwood is, well, not the sticks, but sort of the elegant suburb of Philadelphia, as I recall. Anyway, it's good to see you, Jonathan, and we are going to get caught up a little bit because first time I met you, we were both in the back seat of a car in Pugwash in Nova Scotia, going someplace, and you were on your cell phone, and you were calling U.S. senators, as I recall, just casually, as if you just wanted to check in with these folks, see how they were doing, or something, as if you like first name basis or something. And my jaw dropped. I thought, this is a peacenik with power. Anyway, I think we've met on a few other occasions, and I don't know that you are on the phone with senators every day of the week. But at any rate, it's good to know that I have a friend in high places. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm quarantining and being privileged and living in the suburbs of New York City. It's very easy for me. It's, in fact, my wife and we're enjoying it. We go for hikes in the woods every day. And, we do these Zooms, so we're intimate with people all over the world. We live in a fairly large home. It's not environmentally perfect by any stretch.
Well,
so we're not suffering, but I think of how difficult the present situation must be for people living in apartment houses.
I live in an apartment house and I'm perfectly happy.
Well, yeah, but
I never go out.
You don't go out.
I don't go
but
out.
Imagine if you had 3 children.
Oh, that would be hard. Oh,
and then imagine if one of the people in the house had to go out and work, and when they came back, you either had to quarantine them or you were concerned that they could spread the virus.
Yeah.
And then imagine that you have several generations and you have elderly people who, if they get the virus, they're terribly compromised. And then imagine you're in public housing where you have elevators that are relatively slow, dysfunctional, overcrowded. And then imagine you're in a part of the country, a large part of the country, where people have been told by the former president of the United States not to wear masks. Mm-hmm. And you have to interact with them. Mm-hmm. Just to go to the grocery or get gas for your car or anything. And you're afraid if you tell them, put a mask on, that they might shoot you.
Yeah, I know.
So okay, now, I think of this every day, how privileged I am under these circumstances.
Yeah. Well, I feel the way very privileged too, and I'm very comfortable, and I've got arthritis, so I'm not comfortable, but otherwise I've got a young girl who does errands for me, and I have food delivered, and I have the rich social life because I do this every day. I talk to somebody I'm on Zoom about 4 hours a day, which is better than I used to be, in terms of being in touch with people. So I feel, I'm not missing a thing. Anyway, so we have a lot to get caught up with because you are kind of a mover and shaker in the global peace movement. And I've run into you in other international type meetings. And I like the fact that you titled the institute the Global Security Institute, which is, pretty inclusive. So why don't we talk about what your group organization is up to, and then policy options. Where are we in the start of 2021 with a new administration in the US and the possibility of renewing the START agreement, the new START? where do we stand, and what's our assignment for the year or the decade? How about that for a starter?
Yeah, there's just too much in there, Meta.
Okay. You can break off any chunk of it you want.
Well, first I wanted to, since many people listening are from Canada, I wanted to highlight where we met in Pugwash, Nova Scotia. Mm-hmm. We were at Cyrus Eaton's estate, mm-hmm. which served as a bridge building center for scientists of the then Soviet Union and the United States during the Cold War. And the Pugwash Conference Center has a legacy that most Canadians don't know about, but if they do know about it, it's a matter of appropriate pride. Mm-hmm. So it's this beautiful estate, looking out on the Atlantic Ocean. And during the height of the Cold War, scientists from the Soviet Union and the United States met there. And in 1995, the Nobel Committee bestowed on those conferences a Nobel Peace Prize. And along with that, they gave a particular prize to one of the founders of the Pugwash Conferences, a man named Dr. Joseph Rotblat. And the reason was that Dr. Rotblat was on the Manhattan Project. And when he found out that the heavy water facility in Norway had been blown up by the Norwegian resistance and the British Secret Service operators, that the Nazis could not build an atomic bomb. And the whole premise of the Manhattan Project was to be a deterrent against the Nazis. So he went to the leaders of the Manhattan Project and said, we should stop because the raison d'etre of this project is no longer there. Mm-hmm. And their response was not explicit, but it was essentially, billions of dollars have been spent. We can't just walk off. He said, you build it, you'll use it. And you build it, others will build them. And we'll have a horrible arms race. And as a moral principle, he walked off.
There's a different angle on that story. And your part of it is not one I heard. I interviewed Joe Rotblat once, and the story he told me was that that had to do with Japan. That that General Groves told him that this is not really for winning the war against Japan. This is for what we're going to use it for next, which will be Russia. Because as soon as this war with Japan is over, pretty soon we're going to be in a war with Russia. And that's what we'll need this bomb for. And that's when he decided to quit.
Well, they're not contradictory. There was a slew of reasons that Grove articulated to justify continuing the project. And there's more. There's affirmations that were made to the US military establishment, and particularly to those who had to allocate these huge sums of money. But yes, and of course, there's a very good argument that the reason that we dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was as a message to Stalin, who was about to invade Japan. But let me go back to Pugwash, Canada. Mm-hmm. And so you're absolutely correct. That was one of the arguments but it goes back to the reason for the project of the Manhattan Project begins with a letter from Albert Einstein to President Roosevelt that said the Nazis are going to get the bomb. And that reason falls away. They start looking for other reasons. Yeah. So this was a weapon looking for a rationale. And he considered the weapon immoral, irrational, and extremely dangerous, and founded the Pugwash movement, named after the venue in Canada. And we were there because of a great Canadian leader, Senator Douglas Roach,
Mm-hmm.
who started the Middle Powers Initiative. And the Middle Powers Initiative looked at where the world is and was, which was between the maximalist demand of nuclear abolition now, today, by the majority of countries in the world which don't have nuclear weapons, and the intransigence of the nuclear weapon states, despite their legal obligation under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to negotiate elimination, that middle power countries, countries that rely on the rule of law, that have fairly good records on human rights, Canada, an excellent record, but we were pretty flexible because our issue was not human rights, our issue was nuclear weapons. Countries with legitimate governments that rely on the rule of law could and should be a bridge between the maximalist demands and the intransigence. And to come up with practical steps that the world could take to walk down the nuclear ladder and lead toward fulfilling the legal obligation that the International Court of Justice has articulated, the legal obligation to negotiate the elimination of nuclear weapons, and the legal obligation contained in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And our retreat there was essentially focused on that agenda, building that agenda to build that bridge. And that bridge
really what Pugwash's whole focus was almost the whole time. We branched out a little bit here or there, but this big focus has always been nuclear weapons, nuclear disarmament. Yeah. By the way, Doug Roach had an article just yesterday in the Globe and Mail newspaper about the new non-proliferation, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW. And because Canada has, of course, not endorsed it. So here's, there's a big effort here now to get Canada to not only sign it, but ratify it. And which is, of course, problematic from many points of view, because people want to say, well, we're a member of NATO. It's not possible for a NATO member to join the TPNW. But there's a very strong argument that, yes, it is possible. So that's what he was arguing for yesterday. And we have a new foreign minister, Mark Garneau, who was an astronaut, That's how he got into these global affairs. And he had previously stated his support for nuclear disarmament. I guess before he took a very significant part in the government. But at any rate, now the question is, does he still think that way? And does he have enough clout to make it happen?
Canada also has an excellent ambassador to the United Nations.
Bob Ray. I'm trying to get an appointment with him. One of these days on this show, we'll have Bob Ray, maybe. Who knows? Yeah.
He's a very open, thoughtful, reflective, insightful, inspiring human being. And one would expect great things from him when the UN gets back in motion under the Biden administration. It'll be a lot easier. But Canada has been, missing in action the last few years. It has walked away from its traditional role as a leader in global cooperation, as a bridge-building nation. And in fact, the Department of Foreign Affairs hosted several endeavors with the Middle Powers Initiative. And Senator Roach and I had, I think, no less than 4 meetings with Jean Chrétien.
Really?
I brought the former Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, to a meeting with him.
You did?
Michael Douglas, the actor. The most impressive was a meeting with the former Prime Minister Kim Campbell. And how cordial and how professional and how mature as people they were. I was just thinking of their character, both of them, Chrétien and Campbell, compared to most politicians. Just that they were real people of character and thoughtfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And the current prime minister, to my surprise, given his background, his lineage, with his father was a great world leader, and his youth, has not taken the mantle of global leadership that the world so desperately needs. And I would reach out to him and say, there's a constituency in Canada of the business community that operates at a global law-governed level. The financial community operates at a global level. The human rights community of Canada, both domestically and internationally, has a legacy and positions for which it can take pride. It still is a leader in that globally. On the issue of science and climate, Canada has a global perspective. On the issue of the pandemic, Canada's position in approaching it as a global the vaccine and addressing it as a global public good, Canada has a strong and position to be proud of. But on the issue on international security, on the melting of the Arctic, Canada has a position to be proud of. And it has leaders such as the Order of Canada, which has unanimously come out in favor of the abolition of nuclear weapons. National heroes like Romeo Dallaire, strong nuclear abolitionist. Mm-hmm. And there's a very small minority in Canada dragging their feet on this issue. And on the issue of nuclear abolition, Canada is a laggard, and it has fallen behind. And I don't believe it's consistent with the will of the people of Canada to be a global leader in peace and security. And what it can do in NATO now is cause an ongoing review of the process. And that review must include civil society. Thus far, the NATO review process has really been a very closed process. And that would involve having hearings in the Canadian Parliament. I've testified before the Canadian Parliament, and I was amazed at how sophisticated the parliamentarians were, how they were prepared, and they asked demanding questions. Mm-hmm. So there could be hearings, and organizations like the ones that you're part of, Meta, should be part of that process. And Canada could also be convening middle power countries in a process to build that bridge between the maximalist demands and the intransigence of the nuclear weapon states. There's many things that Canada could do right now. And I want to another thing that Senator Roach was a leader in when he was with Parliamentarians for Global Action, they started an initiative called the Six Nation Initiative. Mm-hmm. And at that time, you had 6 heads of state, Papandreou from Greece, Nuriye from Tanzania, Gandhi from India, Olaf Palme from Sweden, and the respective heads of state of Argentina and Mexico.
I'm glad you can remember all those. I wouldn't have been able to do that.
And they went to Moscow and Washington and made the case that they were all subject to the hazard of the nuclear sword being over their heads, and thus they could only fulfill their first duty as the head of their states, which is to protect their populations, if the Soviet Union and the United States started talking to each other about the issue. And I know from President Gorbachev directly telling me this had a very, very positive effect. Well, Prime Minister Trudeau could start a similar initiative of like-minded heads of state that want to be seized of the issue and bring it to the forefront at the General Assembly debates. Every head of state should be saying, we have yet to fulfill the first resolution of the United Nations to ban weapons of mass destruction, atomic bombs. That's the first resolution.
Everything that you've said, and my own interpretation of this is that Trudeau, the present Trudeau Prime Minister, is very concerned about staying on the good side of the US. That's always been the main motivation, I think, or the main constraint on politicians doing things a little bolder than they've done. And so he was being very careful and cautious about his dealings with Trump. Now the question is, how much more latitude will exist in the Biden years? Biden is by no means a pacifist. He's very much a military-minded person. I don't know how strong he is in favor of nuclear weapons, or whether the plans for the US expansion and modernization of the nuclear arsenal will continue on the present course. But if there is to be any kind of wavering on that, it might give a little bit more room for those, and there is a very strong initiative going on here in Canada to press the Canadian government to take a stronger position against nuclear weapons, and either to get out of NATO, or in most, I think the opinion is sort of divided, whether Canada should leave NATO or use the power that we have within NATO to instigate some changes there. So that's, in a way, I'm going to throw it back in your lap, since I'm on this side of the border and you're on the southern side of this border. And if Biden is going to be a little bit more open to changes of the nuclear policy, how are we going to find that out? Do you have any feelers out on that?
You don't need feelers, just need to look at the policy statements that he ran on, that he's committed to move toward a nuclear weapons-free world.
Well, yeah, but everybody says that. It just means, like 100 years from now, maybe.
No, I'm sorry. That's not what it means.
No? Okay.
No, and I don't think we should frame it as, I think we should stop framing it as we're against nuclear weapons. I think we should frame it as we are for fulfilling promises that have been made under solemnly negotiated treaties.
Mm-hmm.
So we are for law and order in the international arena. We are for fulfilling the legal obligation to negotiate the elimination of nuclear weapons unanimously held by the International Court of Justice and the positive law of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that Canada is a party to and the United States is. And there are practical steps that have been committed to under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that remain outstanding. And Canada can push very hard on those because they'll have support from the Biden administration if it's framed as fulfilling the rule of law. You think that's so? Number one.
Oh, I haven't heard anybody say that. That's really interesting. Because I don't want to disagree with you, Jonathan, but even the Green New Deal people and Ed Markey, who's always the most fervent anti-nuclear weapons guy for the last 50 years or whatever, he's one of the leaders of the Green New Deal. And there's nothing in there about militarism. There's certainly nothing there about nuclear abolition.
No, but he has other legislation. I'm sorry, Meta. He has other legislation on that. He has a no first use legislation. He has a budget. He has a whole, he's been putting forward legislation to change the budget and reduce military spending. All of these. So, no, I mean, certainly Markey has been consistent.
Well, I'm sorry. I shouldn't attribute the failings of the Green New Deal just to Markey. But I'm not criticizing him. I'm criticizing, if anything, the limitations of the Green New Deal, which in every other way is just terrific. But it doesn't really talk about militarism.
No, it shouldn't. Just like it shouldn't talk about that. It should talk about, if the goal is to get it done, you don't throw in it would be politically naive to throw in other issues. You don't want to, you don't want to throw in the right to abortion in it also. You don't want to throw in a human rights issue, although, we support these issues.
Okay.
So it makes no sense to do that. But the same people who are conscious of the need to get off the addiction to fossil fuel are the same parliamentarians globally who want to move to the security of a nuclear weapons-free world. And I know this because one of the programs of the Global Security Institute is Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. Mm-hmm. And Ed Markey is one of the co-presidents of that organization.
Okay, yeah.
And so I interact with parliamentarians all around the world, and these are parliamentarians who get elected on local, mostly parochial issues, that are of local concern, which are taxes and lifestyles and things that are not existential, frankly, but who realize that the world is one, the climate is one. There's no passports for the climate. There's no passports for pandemics. There's no passports anymore for capital, for the movement of capital. Mm-hmm. There's no passports for art, communication, transportation. Although we have passports, you can fly almost anywhere, almost everywhere in the world now.
Not easily under the pandemic.
No, but I'm talking about the psychology of understanding the world. And parliamentarians who understand climate often are the same ones who understand about nukes. Because
that's what my reason. I take your point. I think you're probably politically correct in saying don't hook these things together. Maybe, but I'm always one looking for the connections between things, and the connection between global warming and militarism, and especially nuclear weapons. I think there's a lot to be said about showing that these two issues are interrelated. And I think when I talk to the general public, that's one of the points I try to make. So I guess I was a little disappointed that the Green New Deal doesn't make that connection.
The connection, and this is something that the Global Security Institute is partnering with the United Nations and the World Academy of Arts and Sciences, of which Joseph Rotblat was one of the founders with Einstein and Russell. I'm a fellow in that. And one of the projects that it is as pretentious as it sounds, the World Academy of Arts and Sciences. And I think there's about 650 of us. And one of the projects that we have is to change the paradigm of how security is defined from the disproportionate reliance on militarism and the concept of national security in derogation or minimalizing global security. Precisely, Meta, because of the insight that you have that we need to see security holistically. It's very much the way medicine 50 years ago was very atomized. If you went and said, "Doctor, I have a terrible upset stomach all the time," he would likely give you a pill of some kind to address the symptom of the upset stomach. But today, any good doctor will say, "What are you eating? How is your sleeping? Are you getting exercise?" Etc. Because we now know that the body is a whole. Similarly, the security of the human family cannot be obtained relying only on nationalism. Mm-hmm. So the climate requires global cooperation.
Now, the thing that I am engaged with is called Project Save the World. And we have 6 global threats. They're not all equally ominous, but they can all wipe out 1 billion people at a whack. And that is not only militarism and global warming, which are the 2 biggies, but famine, pandemics, radioactive contamination, and cyber risks. And if you look at them, they're all interconnected. You can't solve any one of them without doing something about one or more of the others. So
that's why we need a new intellectual paradigm called human security, right, where we're focused on human security. So very much in the same way as in the 17th century, when the Christian world was slaughtering, the Christians were slaughtering each other as to whose definition of Jesus' love was better. and a third of Central Europe was destroyed in the Protestants and Catholics slaughtering each other, and since they were killing each other in the interest of immortality of the soul, they weren't going to stop. And there were some, wonks who got together in Westphalia in 1648.
Wonks?
Wonks.
Okay.
Wonks.
Yeah, I hear you. I just was a little surprised that they were called wonks, but good.
They weren't called that then. We now know what they were. They were policy wonks and visionaries. And they got together and created the treaties of Westphalia, which created the modern state. But the purpose of the modern state was to stop this religious madness, not to create a new madness of nationalism. And the UN is an institution that responded to the destruction of much of the world in the 20th century because of the tribalism of nationalism. And so we need to, I think we need to be pushing for a new paradigm of security. And we need to have a global discussion about balancing science, the use of science. The two pillars of this are science as a tool to understand the natural world, but that alone is not sufficient. We also have to affirm the universal values of our humanity. We cannot just have efficiency and science as a value. We have to have the privacy of the individual, freedom of conscience, freedom of assembly, etc. So those are the two prongs, and they have to be balanced. And I think this is something you asked what I'm involved in, and this is where my thinking is now.
Perfect.
And I think this is the kind of thinking that has to be compelling enough to bring the best minds of our time together to come up with a balance between the efficiency that quantum computing and biotech is going to give us, the efficiencies of manipulating populations, and the fundamental freedoms that need to be protected. So, yeah.
How are you working on that? Because I think our goals are 100% compatible, if not identical in nature. But I think that the question of strategy of how to best move the world in that direction is still open for discussion. You moved to being near the UN, presumably because you think the UN is a good place to work on these issues. Is that right? Or why didn't you move to Washington, D.C. instead?
Well, we did. We had an office. With retired diplomats across the street from the Senate, right next to the Supreme Court, and called the Bipartisan Security Group. But in the recent years, there's been no bipartisan discussion, and we couldn't raise any money for it anymore, so we had to close the office. But yeah, so no, we hardly would neglect. It would be very irresponsible to neglect the indispensable country right now in the process. The way in which you infuse an idea into the public debate is by conferences and writing papers. So I just published an article in Cadmus, which is the journal of the World Academy of Arts and Sciences, and chaired the opening session in a 2-day conference with the United Nations on global leadership for the 21st century. Mm-hmm. And it was very high level and a very high level discussion, So, I mean, it was opened by the Director General of the UN. And so that's what we're doing. You write, you convene, you discuss, you identify allies, and you build a movement for it. But this isn't this isn't new. This isn't new, but what's new is
But I think it's not only not new, but it's what we are in now is kind of a throwback or recession period toward nationalism. I mean, all of this populist thinking, it has made it worse. Not only the Trump period, but all these other dictators or wannabe dictators around the world are certainly nationalists in their orientation, not by any means. They're anti-globalists, is what they think they are. So I hope that we're going to come out on the other side of that now, that we will be, except that the whole pandemic has created more, the borders between countries are impenetrable now and much more local thinking. So I don't know that I'm very optimistic that we are really passing out of this period of nationalistic chauvinism into a more global way of thinking. I'd like to think that as soon as the pandemic is over, we'll automatically see the value in interacting as a whole global community. But are you optimistic at this point in time?
I don't think that way.
Don't you? Okay.
No, I think like what's actually going on, where can I make a difference? And I don't look at it like, what's the likelihood of success or anything. These, for me, these are issues of moral compulsion. And so I don't use that metric, but I do try and look and see which way the wind is blowing to figure out whether the wind's behind us or the wind's in front of us.
Mm-hmm. That's really what I was asking.
When the wind's in front of you, you can tack, you can still move the boat forward. But so the first thing that Joe Biden did is he rejoined the World Health Organization. That's mm-hmm. pretty clear, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now we're going to rejoin the START Treaty.
And the Paris Agreement.
So, I mean, we're fighting for the soul, not just of America, but the soul of modernity. And modernity has created an international cosmopolitan class that understands exactly what you and I take for granted. Mm-hmm. The reality of the picture, the icon from outer space, that the world is one mysterious, graceful sphere in infinity where love is possible. There may be life other places, maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but we know that the highest value of love is possible here. And people understand that icon. It's not just a marble, it's an icon, it's a symbol of our human unity and mystery and wonder. And the other icon of the modern age is the quest for security through the affirmation of absolute power and destruction, which is the mushroom cloud. And my grandfather would see a mushroom cloud and he would think of mushroom soup. But I see a mushroom cloud and I think of Nagasaki, the last time these weapons were used. And the pathway of nationalism, leads to war. That's where it leads to. And to quote Martin Luther King on the subject, if modern man continues to flirt unhesitatingly with war, and he's talking in the context of nuclear weapons at his Nobel acceptance speech, he will transform his earthly habitat into an inferno such that even the mind of Dante could not imagine. And that's what's before us. Mm-hmm. And we need to make it very clear to our political leaders that this is how we see it, that this is not just an issue of partisanship, that this is not just an issue of normal political discourse, but this is an issue of a fundamental sense of the blasphemy of degrading the gift of creation itself in derogation of God's blessing in favor of something we've created, that we created. Human beings create states. We didn't create the planet Earth. We didn't create the climate. We didn't create life. We created states. And we created the states. Why? We created them to stop our madness of religious bigotry. So we need to start redefining things based on the truth, this whole misidentification with the things that separate us rather than the reality of our common humanity is what's at stake.
I want to let you know how much I appreciate the idealism and the inspiration of the way you speak about these matters. And I think we have not only the ideals that everybody shares, and even these thugs, patriots who are really doing so much damage. Some part of them recognizes all of the things that you've just said, and so we all at some part of our soul we share these values, but of course the reality is also there are very practical, pragmatic, realistic, this worldly reasons for abolishing nuclear weapons.
Well, we're the realists.
We are.
We need to claim the realist debate because it is not realistic to continue to be addicted to fossil fuel and think there's a sustainable future. It's not realistic. It's not realistic to think you can have a vaccine apartheid world with walled states, with walled communities, with walled hearts, and leaders who are that way. It's not realistic. It's not realistic. It's interesting that it was Ronald Reagan pushed the Montreal Protocols to protect the ozone.
I'd forgotten.
Right. Mm-hmm. And Ronald Reagan called George Shultz to his office, a right-wing conservative American president, but he wasn't a fascist. He wasn't crazy. And he said, look, the scientists are giving me alarmist information that we could be destroying the ozone, causing massive cancer and agricultural disruption. Maybe they're wrong, maybe they're right, but we should have an insurance policy. And we can't lead in America to get this done. Mm-hmm. Because who brought him into office was the right wing. Mm-hmm. So America was wind in the sails of the Montreal Protocols, which Canada should be proud of. And when people say, oh, you can't get the cooperation, we can't get the world to be realistic. Not true. Canada led with American support in getting the protection of the ozone and reversing the destruction of the ozone layer from hydrofluorocarbon molecules. This is the time in which that opportunity has arisen now. Mm-hmm. And Canada can push America toward a new realism in human security and global cooperation. And you have the intellectual heft in Canada, and you have the parliamentarians in Canada who understand this, and the Neanderthals who are still talking about unrealistic myths like strategic stability, that NATO is going to have strategic. How can you have strategic stability when you're also pursuing military advantage? It's totally schizophrenic. So we have to say, we don't believe you're being honest. You're being unrealistic. Do you want strategic stability? That means lowering the salience of the weapons. If you want military advantage, we're going to have an arms race that'll bankrupt us and make the use of weapons more likely. Neither of these are realistic. What is realistic is working together on those existential threats that you laid out: the climate, cyber, pandemics, poverty, you called hunger, I call it poverty, nuclear weapons, and on the horizon, nanotechnology, quantum computing, biotech, and all of these new capacities that we have. This is what's before us. Mm-hmm. Either we're going to be in pieces or we're going to be in peace. And a country like Canada has a legacy. And the moral authority, by the way, you domestically have a country that's truly multicultural and a true sense of freedom. And when I hear the scandals that you guys have, and that it upsets the Canadian people, and I think of what we are living through in the United States. I mean, we just had an attempted coup.
I know. And you know what our scandal is? The prime minister was caught eating a chocolate bar in Parliament. And he had to apologize.
Yes, yes, honestly. So Canada, grow up already. You know, you're claim the valid dignity that you actually exemplify, and be the leaders that you have to be, and demand of your leaders that they take a global leadership role, because you've got the right to do it.
Well, Jonathan, you got me all fired up. I can hardly wait to finish my day. We have so many things to do, and you're doing your part, and I want to do what I can. And thank you for this, because I want to share it with my Canadian friends, and they're going to be all fired up too. So it's wonderful to have you as our partner, and especially to have you there at the UN, where you have access to some people that we don't necessarily have much contact with. So bless you.
Oh, bless you. Thank you, Meta. And thank you for being a thought leader and a heart leader for so many years. This is not something that you've just come to in a fashion way. This is something that was a calling that you responded to.
It's true. Yeah, it's true of both of us, but for me, it's also fun. I don't hope you're having as much fun with it as I am.
but I think that we have to give the millennials need to know that you can make a difference. Mm. We can claim some victories. Mm-hmm. That our voices, although they're not because they bring peace. Peace is not as eyeball compelling as conflict. We're set up to watch out for conflict, but when there's peace, we just kind of take it for granted. It's like our health.
Right.
It's like our health. When you're healthy, you don't think about it. Well, we should. And we should be grateful for our health, and we should be grateful for people like you, Meta, who have responded thanklessly to the call for peace.
Bless you, my friend. And it's just a delight to be back in touch.
Anytime,
Meta. Next time we meet, it may be in the backseat of a car going someplace in Pugwash, Nova Scotia. Or it might be in Geneva, I think, which is the last time I met you.
Maybe hearings in Ottawa.
Or maybe hearings in Ottawa. Indeed, indeed. Thank you, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.